Even though Merle has no personal wealth, she is there with help whenever Vietnam has a request. These international friends are people who live according to political and humane ideals. Their happiness comes from following those ideals. It would take a long time to tell all the stories of our friends on the 5 continents. The points I want to record here are not only from my own personal experience but also perhaps from the common experience of all of us. During the struggle, we suffered losses and savored our gains against the enemy. We always kept in mind the party's crucial guideline. We must unify all our own people and, after that, unify internationally. In truth, this directive was ingenious. Suppose we had not taken full advantage of the assistance from the Soviet Union, China, and the Socialist Bloc. Suppose we had let ourselves be stopped by the conflicts and by the crossed purposes between those countries. If so, we would surely not have received their political support and military and financial assistance. Taken together, that aid gave us the means to secure victory. Suppose Vietnam had not enjoyed an international solidarity movement, particularly in the United States. If so, we could not have shaken Washington's aggressive will. The memoirs of many politicians from the American administrations at that time also make this point. The U.S. administrations had to address the widespread public opinion opposing the meaningless war they had created in Vietnam. The U.S. anti-war movement in solidarity with Vietnam drew from many forces: communists, leftists, progressive people, those who simply love peace and justice, and others. This political and material strength shook the most stubborn, conservative, and warlike minds in the U.S. political leadership. The Vietnamese people have great appreciation for the peace and anti-war movements in the United States and view those movements' contributions as important in shortening the war and re-establishing peace in Vietnam. Not long ago, an American film team visiting Vietnam asked me, "Is it true that Vietnam profited from the divisions within the United States?" "No," I answered. "We don't think that way. The work that we did took advantage of the American people's spirit, which prizes peace and justice, to oppose again and again the useless and destructive war in Vietnam, which provided no benefit for the American people. It is fortunate that many Americans, particularly the women, understood this point and stood on the side of common sense and peace. That made possible the path leading to later reconciliation between the people of our 2 nations. The press and mass media also played a major role. At times, people called the press and mass media the second authority, after the administrative authority. Journalists dared to speak the truth and, despite intimidation and punishment, accurately portrayed our suffering and the demands of the anti-war movement. Their work affected the U.S. government's attitudes and policies. Most of all, I must speak about the progressive journalists who dared to visit the NLFPRG liberated areas to report on our soldiers and on our people's war. They were prepared to accept every sacrifice and endure every imaginable difficulty. We will always remember Madeleine Riffo, who spoke from her heart, saying, "Vietnam is a part of my life." Along with her were many other journalists from Humanite, the newspaper of the French Communist Party. Wilfrid Burchett was always jovial and smiling. Burchett published interviews which had a huge effect on public opinion, so much so that although he was an Australian citizen, he was not allowed to return to Australia. Then there was the Bulgarian woman writer Dimitrova and older sister Vanessa, who was Polish. We are also indebted to the hundreds of journalists who stuck to the Paris conference from beginning to end in order to distribute news about the seemingly endless negotiations. We must recognize the American journalists from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CBS television, as well as the AP and UPI news agencies. They were dedicated to capturing the situation and the news. In time, they helped Americans and other peoples follow the war and see clearly the frightfully violent rain of bombs, the ghastly massacres, the imprisonment of ordinary citizens, and the painful loss of American soldiers. We must recognize journalists Seymour Hersh and Don Luce, as well as many other international journalists, who courageously exposed the truth. Through their efforts, public opinion particularly in the United States learned about the My Lai massacre and the notorious tiger cages. In the prison on Con Dao Island, the world heard about so many other cruelties perpetrated by the U.S. aggressors. After the war, I had the chance to see documentary films of tremendous value by filmmakers from Canada, Belgium, and other countries. I came to understand more about what was known on this side and that side during the long and endlessly cruel war in Vietnam. Finally, I want to say that all of us active in the diplomatic front can affirm this point. The battlefield decides the results at the negotiating table. The struggle and sacrifice of our troops and our people in every victorious step during decades of struggle conquered the hearts and minds of progressive peoples across the world and eventually forced the enemy to submit. Endlessly important to the southern battlefield was this our stable rearguard in the socialist north, where for years every person truly lived and worked every day with the spirit of everything for the South, everything for our kin. Vietnam's struggle for independence and freedom lasted for more than 20 years, filled with excruciating sacrifices requiring endless heroism from our people. Our struggle has become a symbol receiving the world's esteem. Yet the strong spirit of international unity has not yet reached the millions and millions of the world's deserving people who are still struggling. I am extremely proud of my country, of our people, and of our friends. 9. Reunification of the country. April 30, 1975 is memorable in our country's history and, for me, a day I can never forget. For 20 years, our people in both the South and the North had earnestly wished for reunification of our homeland. For 20 years, our country was divided. For 20 years, families were separated. For 20 years, wives and husbands waited for each other. For the first time, after 20 years, some 20-year-old adults finally saw their fathers' faces. Some of my friends standing amidst this indescribable exuberance faced equally indescribable sorrow. They'd been unable to find their father or mother, or a bomb had killed their husband or wife and their children. For them, joy lay buried beneath bombs and military mopping up operations. A few days before May 13, 1975, I traveled from Hanoi to Saigon with comrades in the leadership. Even though I had lived in Saigon and had been an activist there, I could no longer recognize areas of the city. Our troops' general offensive and the people's uprising had liberated Saigon. But in many places it seemed as if everything were still intact. This was marvelous. During the resistance war against France, I had lived with my family at the memorial to Elder Phan Chau Trinh, my maternal grandfather, near Da Cao Market in Ward 5, District 3. On returning in 1975, I was surprised to find still standing the memorial to Grandfather Phan. The surrounding neighborhoods where we had tacked up our propaganda posters and held our demonstrations so many years before were still there. Yet everything was in disorder, chaotic, and confused. Perhaps this was one of the negative after effects of the war. So many people had abandoned their homes in the rural areas and fled to the city to avoid bombs and mortars as well as to earn a living. They had crowded into Saigon and into my former neighborhood. In other areas, the Saigon authorities had widened the streets, and the buildings were far grander, with imposing villas, tall buildings, and elegant shops displaying a surfeit of foreign goods. The American military had dominated some areas of the city for 20 years, investing billions of dollars. The most symbolic trace of the former Saigon administration was Independence Palace. The new administration immediately changed its name to Unification Palace. The Americans and the Saigon administration had fled the city during the recent turbulence, but by now, the streets were peaceful under our new administration. The people were exuberant. Surely, some people associated with the previous administration remained worried. However, their worries abated when they saw that the Liberation Army soldiers were not barbaric, as the local citizenry had been told. The huge event on May 13 in front of Unification Palace was solemn and monumental. On the long presidium sat the Provisional Revolutionary Government's most senior leaders Nguyen Hu Tho, Nguyen Tan Phat, Tran Nam Trung, and others, along with comrades from the leadership of the Vietnamese Workers' Party, now the Vietnamese Communist Party. That group included Uncle Ton Duc Thang, Comrade Le Duan, Pham Hung, and others. For the first time, the people of Saigon saw the party and state leaders whose names and work they had known for decades but only through newspapers and radio. PRG Council of Government President Nguyen Hu Tho spoke, praising the troops and the people who had fought so heroically. They had achieved a glorious victory as well as independence, freedom, and reunification for our magnificent homeland. A parade followed. Our foot soldiers carrying their weapons marched by, and then we watched a display of the Liberation Army's military equipment. Everyone in Saigon was in the streets during those historic days in the middle of May 1975. We all understood that now we could really live in peace. The South had achieved liberation, and we had reunited our homeland from the northern tip at Nam Quan to the southern tip at Ca Mau. I was indescribably buoyant during that ceremony, as were the millions of others who had lived through the two fierce resistance wars. At times, I felt as if I were dreaming. I was endlessly moved to meet old friends after decades of separation, particularly the brothers and sisters with whom I had been in prison at Kai Hua. We had all aged markedly. Many comrades had passed on. They would never be among us again. We had endless stories to share about our activities in the resistance, the different fronts where we had served, and our families. My most pressing task was to search for my younger brother, Ha, whom the Saigon authorities had imprisoned on Con Dao Island in 1968, when I began participating in the Paris Conference. At that time, Ha was an activist in Saigon. The gang of informers knew he was the younger brother of Nguyen Thi Binh. The Saigon police arrested him. Ha endured every type of corporal punishment during the fierce questioning before they exiled him to Con Dao. For nearly 7 years, he lived there in a tiger cage. A far crueler cell than those of the Middle Ages. Perhaps my younger brother's pain was not just that he was tortured from the outset but, rather, a deeper, far sharper pain. His wife, Tu Suong, was also arrested, because she was Ha's wife and because Ha was the younger brother of me. Bin and a grandson of Phan Chau Trin. Ha's wife had just given birth. Their baby, who was not yet 2 months old, was also taken to prison. Tu Suong was in prison for 6 years, including 2 years at Con Dao. Theirs was the pain of so many families during the resistance. With mothers and fathers both in prison, the children also became prisoners, or the children were sent to relatives for a time here, for a time there. I knew that on May 1, 1975, the day after Saigon's liberation, the revolutionary administration sent boats to fetch the brothers and sisters in the Con Dao prison. Hi, my fourth younger sibling, and I went from one reception camp to another, searching for Ha. We witnessed countless reunions between close family members, the uncontrollable emotions, people laughing, crying, laughing, crying. Finally, we arrived at Hung Vong Reception Center and found our brother, Nguyen Dong Ha, whom we had not seen for 21 years. He was pale but not gaunt. Although he had aged terribly, his eyes were bright. Although he looked exhausted, he still could smile. While my father was still alive, His eyes would fill with tears whenever anyone mentioned my younger brother in prison. Ha and I hugged each other as if we would never let go. Ha's wife and children had also arrived. We left for the house of Ha's wife, Tu Suong, who had been released earlier. As a District 1 official, she had received an apartment on Pham Ngu Lao Street. It had been so long since we had been together, although we still did not have with us our 3 younger siblings, who were in Hanoi. Several months later, we had a chance to have everyone together at the shrine for Elder Phan. By this time, most of our younger siblings had married. Hai was nearly 40 years old when he married, and so he had children late. Lone and her husband had both graduated from Tsinghua University in China. They had a son and then later, a daughter. Ho had married and had faced difficulties, but by this point, his family situation was tranquil. Only Hao had yet to establish a family. A soldier for 7 years, he had hiked down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. After our mother's early death, I had tried to step into her place and help my siblings as they grew to adulthood. Now, there remained only Hao, the youngest, of whom I was terribly fond. I can say that he probably bore the greatest loss in our family. I had yet to complete my responsibility, for I still needed to help him secure family happiness. Although I was busy with my family, I needed to return quickly to professional responsibilities, since I was still the PRG foreign minister. Several brothers and sisters in the PRG ministry took over the Saigon regime's foreign ministry offices and began working there. Soon, we transferred the PRG's foreign ministry from Cam Lo in Quang Tri province to Saigon. I assigned Comrade Hoang Bich Sun, our deputy foreign minister, and several other officials to take direct responsibility in Saigon. I continued to work in Hanoi until complete reunification in July 1976. The major political issue was when to unite the state administration. Some held that complete reunification required no discussion since the people in both sectors longed for a unified country and since independence and reunification had been the basic goals of our people's continuous struggle for decades. However, others thought we should preserve 2 administrations for a time. These colleagues pointed to the 2 different political systems that had been in place. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRVN, was already established as a socialist state, whereas the Provisional Revolutionary Government, PRG, of South Vietnam was still a nationalist, independent, and neutral state. The NLF-PRG platform was carefully neither pro-socialist nor pro-capitalist. These colleagues urged that we keep the South as it was in order to secure outside cooperation and assistance from socialist, nationalist, and capitalist nations and their organizations. In the end, we unanimously accepted the proposal to implement complete reunification of the country and its ministries, departments, and organizations as soon as possible. I raised my hand in agreement. Now, looking back after many years, I know that this guideline was correct. Prolonging the division and its differences might have given the United States the advantages needed in order to meddle. The situation might have become more complicated and difficult. We can look at other divided countries and see that our decision was appropriate. Usually, when we re-examine an issue, we might say this side or that side should have been more flexible. However, this basic decision was correct and far-sighted. On June 17, 1975, a large, historic meeting took place at the Unification Palace between the Fatherland Front of Vietnam, the North, and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, the South. The leaders of both fronts attended. I was also there. The discussion was heated but also serious and filled with a sense of responsibility. President Nguyen Hu Tho presented the NLF's contributions during 15 years opposing the United States. Since the front had now completed its historic responsibilities, He proposed establishing a unified front for the entire country to facilitate early reunification in all fields. This consultative conference decided to establish a nationwide front, the Vietnamese Fatherland Front. The newly forming, interim Fatherland Front then proposed nationwide National Assembly elections for 1976. In April 1976, candidates for the 6th National Assembly, counting from the first National Assembly election in 1946, went to the localities to mobilize the electorate. I was introduced to serve as a candidate for Saigon's districts 4, 7, and 8 as well as Con Dao Island, which at that time belonged to Saigon City. Comrades Pham Hung, Tran Ban Tra, Nguyen Hu Tho, and others were on the same list of candidates. This was the first time in many years that I mingled with the people of Saigon. The voters came out in large numbers to see the faces of those in the PRG whose names they had been hearing for a long time. Older brother Tra and I went to Con Dao. The population there was thinly scattered. We toured the areas where the enemy had held our revolutionary warriors, from the cattle barn of French colonialism to the tiger cages of U.S. imperialism. The local authorities had cleaned up the area. Nevertheless, we stared at the instruments used to intimidate and torture the brothers and sisters whom the Saigon authorities had held as political prisoners. I felt keenly aware that I'd been the beneficiary of countless lives sacrificed by the comrades who had gone before me. The election results were announced in June 1976. I was one of the candidates to receive the most votes. I served as a representative in the National Assembly from the 6th session, 1976 to 1981, continuously through the 10th session, 1997 to 2002. In August 1976, I returned to Hanoi. Comrade Le Van Luong, then a Politburo member and head of the party's Central-Level Organizing Committee, came to see me. He suggested I accept the position of Minister of Education in the new government. He said this responsibility was very important in this next stage of building the country. The comrades had noticed in my curriculum vitae that I had been a teacher. I was completely surprised. I had gathered some experience during more than 14 years working in foreign affairs. It seemed to me that continuing in foreign affairs would better use my capabilities. Yet faced with Comrade Le Van Luong's encouragement, I felt I should accept the party's assignment. After reunification, one issue during 1977 and 1978 left me constantly uneasy. The party promulgated Directive Z.30 to transform the capitalist industries and commerce in the former South to socialism. One of my husband's younger sisters and her family had opened a store selling Western medicine in Cholan. Appearance of their names on the list for transformation paralyzed them. All their pharmaceutical goods were confiscated, and their store was sealed. I went to visit. Husband and wife were terribly worried. I tried to explain the policy, but at the bottom of my heart, I was very uneasy. I couldn't understand. What good could come of this? Surely, my family could not continue to run their drugstore. I never saw them again. Later, I learned that this guideline was re-examined, but I wondered. Had the leaders drawn from deep experience? Had they realized the depth of the negative results? I continued my PRG diplomatic activities from 1975 until September 1976, when I moved to the Ministry of Education. In July 1975, the Non-Aligned Movement (NAM) foreign ministers met in Lima, Peru, the first Latin American country I visited after Cuba. The President of Peru gave our PRG delegation a warm welcome and congratulated us on the Vietnamese people's great victory. He presented me with a precious gift, a bracelet made from a strand of gold. However, during the conference, there was a peaceful coup in Peru and a new president. We were worrying about the new administration's attitude when the Peruvian foreign minister passed along the new president's message. Friends, be at ease. Although Peru has undergone an internal change, we still support and esteem the Vietnamese people. A major agenda item for the NAM foreign ministers meeting was discussion of new members to be admitted. Among the candidates were the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, DRVN, North Vietnam, North Korea, South Korea, and the Philippines. At this time, the DRVN had not participated in the non-aligned movement, although the PRG was an official member. Nguyen Thi Binh led the DRVN delegation. Of course, the DRVN met no difficulty, since our two delegations each encouraged the other countries to accept the DRVN. The PRG's prestige was high from the Vietnamese victory. Other nations facing thorny problems often came to ask for our suggestions. During this particular meeting, the most difficult issue was South Korea's possible admission into NAM. Of course, the PRG would support North Korea and oppose South Korea. South Korea had supported U.S. policies during the war, even to the extent of sending soldiers to occupy South Vietnam. Those troops had perpetrated many atrocities against our people. Thus, our delegation said, we could not call South Korea a non-aligned nation. Some NAM members supported the Philippines' admission, but other delegations refused their support after we informed everyone that U.S. airplanes had left airbases in the Philippines to bomb Vietnam. One DRVN delegation member questioned whether we should think of the future and support the Philippines. Yet how could we forget the recent past, when the tears of our compatriots, the mothers of sons sacrificed in the war, had not dried? Several months later, Nguyen Thi Binh and I went with several other comrades to Mexico, Venezuela, and other countries to research the possibilities of exploiting Vietnam's natural reserves of oil. After liberation, our first worry had been securing sufficient rice for our people. Our second concern was petrol. The cooperation between Vietnam and the Soviet Union on development of Vietnamese oil reserves began during this period. However, first we had to borrow oil for economic and military activities, as well as for our people's daily life. In October 1975, three of us comrade truck from the office of the government, an interpreter, and I visited Algeria, Libya, and Iraq to borrow oil. Even though these friendly countries supported Vietnam, addressing economic matters was not easy. Nevertheless, we were able to borrow oil for immediate use with preferential interest rates. The visit to Iraq left me with deep impressions. At that time, Saddam Hussein, whom many of the Iraqi people regarded as a hero, had just become vice president of Iraq. Hearing Vietnam's urgent request, he answered immediately, saying, "We will give Vietnam 400,000 tons of oil and lend 1.5 million tons with a preferred interest rate." I heard this, but I could not believe my ears. I asked the interpreter whether he was sure this was true. We were so touched by this gesture from our Iraqi friends. Later, Iraq suffered under the embargo and had to exchange oil for food. Nevertheless, our friends continued to sign commercial contracts favorable to us during the years when we had many economic difficulties. In 2002, I went back to Iraq to address our debt of more than 20 years, which we still had not completely repaid. According to suggestions from our government, we proposed transferring the debt into investment in an economic project in Vietnam. When I met Saddam Hussein to propose this idea, he laughed and said, "You Vietnamese friends needn't worry. I know you face difficulties. We will view this debt as paid." Once again, I was so touched, for I knew Iraq was suffering from an American embargo and experiencing its own difficulties on every front. We all know how the situation in Iraq has changed. U.S. President George Bush mobilized a war against Iraq by accusing Saddam Hussein of a relationship with the al-Qaeda terrorist forces and the production of weapons of mass destruction. Later the world learned that these accusations were bold lies invented to implement a scheme for U.S. profit. Iraqi history will decide whether Saddam Hussein made mistakes domestically, internationally, or against his own people. Nevertheless, I think we Vietnamese should be grateful for his much-needed assistance throughout the early years when our country was recovering from war. During the war against the United States in Vietnam, I had many opportunities to travel to the Middle East. This region is wealthy because large oil reserves lie beneath its dry sands. Yet perhaps these many seams of black gold keep the people from having tranquil lives. I harbor deep feelings about the fate of the Palestinian people and their struggle for an independent Palestinian state. When will they achieve victory? Palestinians must still live like refugees from their own ancestral homes. Once when I was visiting Iraq, our interpreter was an Iraqi married to a Palestinian, who had sacrificed himself in the independence struggle. Their 20-year-old daughter, who was strong and beautiful, had just finished university in Beirut, Lebanon. She said, "I don't know what my future will be. Like most of my friends, I will follow the call of our leader, Arafat." Her soft, calm words moved me deeply. So many Palestinian youth have fallen and will fall during the unequal struggle so they can have their own country, their own homeland. After the reunification of Vietnam, I left the diplomatic service, where I had been active for many years, and moved to education. This was a huge step for me. Now, looking back, I can see that my growth as a public servant continued. The lessons I had accumulated in my diplomatic service were useful for my next assignment. 10. A united front opposing the United States and the Saigon administration. After April 30, 1975, I was again able to meet close friends I had not seen in more than 20 years. This was a great joy. I also met once more many people whom I had known in different situations. Now, we were each far older, and each had somewhat different views. Together, we reviewed the experiences that had led us to follow different routes during those difficult times under French colonialism and American imperialism. We asked each other about our lives, sharing our innermost emotions and private hopes. I heard many simple, heartfelt words expressing such deep feelings, but also many secret, opposing, and worrisome thoughts. Many times, I have returned to Ho Chi Minh City on a work assignment and in particular for anniversaries of the liberation of the South on April 30th. I have taken the time when there to share stories with these brothers and sisters, along with those whom I had known by name only but had not met. I had known lawyer Tran Ngoc Liang when we were activists with lawyer Nguyen Hu Tho. Now, he was living in a monastery, as he said, for peace of mind. Others, such as Professor Lee Chan Trung and priests Win Kong Min and Phan Cac Tu, had been representatives in the Saigon National Assembly several years before. Journalists Lee Kai Chung, Ho Ngoc Nguyen, and Go Kong Duc had been members of the opposition in the Saigon National Assembly's lower house. These days, when the Ho Chi Minh City leaders speak at post-war celebrations, they emphasize our people's glorious victory in returning independence and unification to our homeland. They praise the important contributions of the army and political leadership in the struggle to liberate the country in general and Saigon in particular. I have often suggested that when they speak of the political forces in the South, they should also talk about the Third Force and its role in national reconciliation and concord. However, these comrades remain hesitant to engage this issue. I think this situation is not yet as it should be. As an insider, they had the opportunity to know and understand some truths, which perhaps have been forgotten. I feel it is my responsibility to speak out about those points. It is terribly difficult to gain complete clarity on all matters that occurred during our people's prolonged struggle. We had many secret activities, in many different places, at many different times, with many different lines of communication. We who held positions of responsibility and who are still living must make the truth clear. We must be sure no one is forgotten. This is a fundamental truth for me because I believe each of us has only one life. Thus, we should never allow a person's life to languish in misunderstanding. The National Liberation Front, NLF, of South Vietnam came into being in 1960. It lifted aloft the flag of solidarity, gathering many strata of people together in order to end the war of aggression, liberate the South, and reunite our homeland. The Alliance of National, Democratic, and Peace Forces was established after Tet 1968, the Year of the Monkey. If the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam is considered the first force, then the Alliance would be the second force. Following the Alliance, other political and social organizations appeared in Saigon, including the Women's Movement for the Right to Life and the Movement to Protect the National Culture. The Buddhists and Catholics also organized many groups and actions to demand peace and national reconciliation. These groups became the third force. Before the signing of the Paris Agreement in January 1973, Comrade Le Duan, the party general secretary, sent a letter to the party's central level for the South. He wrote, "You must hasten to pull together the various groups advocating peace, independence, democracy, and national reconciliation to form a third force in order to split and isolate the oppositional forces even more and to direct a spearhead into Thu and the most warlike factions close to the United States. You need to research how to expand the National Liberation Front and the National Alliance of Democratic and Peace Forces as appropriate to the new situation. At the same time, you need to organize well and unite your activities with the third force to oppose the U.S. Thu forces." As we all know, in 1973, after 4 years of negotiations, the balance of forces between us and the enemy compelled the Americans to end their war in the South, withdraw their soldiers and their satellite state from the South, and end their air war against the North. During the negotiations, we relaxed our position on the political administration in the South. We no longer demanded that the Paris Agreement require Thu's resignation and the removal of the Saigon administration. Instead, we required only a National Council for Reconciliation and Concord with 3 sectors, the PRG, the Saigon administration, and the third force. This council would implement the Paris Agreement's points leading toward a nationwide election. After the 4 parties signed the Paris Agreement, the Saigon administration refused to implement its provisions. Rather, it sent troops to occupy our liberated areas, froze out the Reconciliation Conference, and continued fighting to its final bullet and its last grain of rice. Many political organizations, some associated with the Third Force, demanded that President Thu apply the Paris Agreement and implement national reconciliation and concord. Many also demanded his resignation. Ngo Ba Tan, an intellectual famous for her courageous spirit in the struggle, was a leader of the women's movement for the right to life. She officially labeled herself as Third Force. The Thu administration arrested Ngo Ba Tan, but then public pressure forced the Saigon regime to release her. On October 8, 1973, Ngo Ba Tan stood before intellectuals, many representatives of the Saigon National Assembly, Saigon administration officials, and foreign journalists. She announced, "We are indeed the third political force." Lawyer Tran Ngoc Liang, whom I knew maintained close ties to the NLF, had been on the same ticket with General Duong Van Minh in the presidential elections and was a member of Duong Van Minh's group. Duong Van Minh returned to Saigon from Thailand after the Paris Conference. Mr. Tran Ngoc Liang established the People's organization demanding implementation of the Paris Agreement. He announced, "We are part of the Third Force." At that time, young intellectuals serving on Duong Van Minh staff included Professor Lee Chan Trung, Priest Nguyen Ngoc Lan, and representatives from the Saigon National Assembly, such as Ho Ngoc Nguyen, Duong Van Ba, Go Kong Duc, Lee Kai Chung, and others. All had direct or indirect relations with the NLF in Saigon or Paris. Their clear position, in the middle, stood for reconciliation between the first and second parties, the NLF-PRG and the Thu administration. These men were patriots, but they were not communists. During the Paris negotiations, we particularly Sister Nguyen Thi Chan and Brother Phan Nhan educated and mobilized those who supported our just position. This work included organizing with overseas Vietnamese and Vietnamese who came from the South on visits to Paris. We increased our base of action inside the country by encouraging intellectuals to return home, among them, Ton Nhu Thi Ninh, Tran Ha An, Tai Thi Ngoc Du, Bui Tran Phuong, and others. Many brothers and sisters who returned home were zealous activists in the Third Force. Later, they held important positions to help rebuild the country. After the Paris Agreement took effect, Mr. Nguyen Hu Chau, former Minister of Interior from the Ngo Dinh Diem administration, Mr. O Trong Tan, former Minister of Economy in the Thu Ky. Kim administration, both held press conferences outside the country on behalf of the Third Force. They requested the two sides in South Vietnam seriously implement the Paris Agreement and quickly establish the National Council for Reconciliation and Concord with its three sectors. On January 16, 1975, the Third Force in Paris organized a Day for the South, demanding the United States oust Thu. By April 26, 1975, our army was pressuring Saigon. Comrade Din Ba Thi was in Paris, serving as deputy head of the PRG representative delegation at the consultative conference between the two sides in South Vietnam. He announced the PRG's two position points. The United States must strictly implement provisions 1, 4, and 9 of the Paris Agreement. The Saigon administration must be abolished. Its neo-colonial and war apparatus must be eliminated. And its system of domination over the people of South Vietnam must end. At that time, French and international public opinion perceived this as a call for the Saigon administration's surrender. We invited Mr. Go Kong Duc and Priest Nguyen Dinh Thi to our office in Paris to inform them of this announcement. On April 27, 1975, Mr. Go Kong Duc flew from Paris to Thailand, because Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport was already closed to incoming flights, to inform Mr. Duong Van Minh. I want to make clearer the role of Mr. Duong Van Minh and his group with regard to their position on implementing national reconciliation. Why, on the very day our troops expanded our historic Ho Chi Minh campaign, did Duong Van Minh and his group switch from the Third Force and stand up to replace the Thu administration and establish a cabinet with Duong Van Minh as president? We must remember October 8, 1974, when the PRG promulgated its position regarding the situation in South Vietnam. We demanded that the United States terminate its military involvement and intervention in the internal affairs of South Vietnam, overthrow Nguyen Van Thu, and establish in Saigon an administration agreeing to peace and national reconciliation as well to implementation of the Paris Agreement. According to many documents we now have, the events occurred as follows. After the signing of the Paris Agreement on January 27, 1973, the Saigon administration grew weaker on every front, making a coup possible. Members of Duong Van Minh's staff decided that they must overthrow Thu, establish a peace cabinet, and negotiate with the PRG to end the war. They reasoned that no other group could do this. Further, they were quite sure the PRG would accept negotiations because Duong Van Minh's group had had direct and indirect relations with the PRG and had joined the struggle against the US Thu regime in the capital. Nevertheless, the members of Duong Van Minh's group had to resolve their internal, opposing ideas, a process that continued until the beginning of April 1975. Almost a month before the collapse of the Thu administration, this group announced its decision to replace Thu in order to end the war, even if it had to hold aloft the white flag of surrender. As for Duong Van Minh's role, a document from the Secretariat of the party's central level provides this evaluation. Although Mr. Duong Van Minh had not yet implemented all our requests, his announcement, on April 30, and the order promulgated by Nguyen Hu Han contained decisive content. It lessened the Saigon Army's will to resist in the final hours of the war, thereby creating the conditions for our armed forces to accelerate the liberation of Saigon. I think this evaluation is satisfactory. However, if we search more deeply into Mr. Duong Van Minh's background and listen to the accounts of the progressive people around him, then we can see that Duong Van Minh's actions reflect his knowledge of the world and show that he was a patriot. On the morning of April 30, 1975, French General Vanuxem asked to see President Duong Van Minh. Mr. Vu Van Mao was present at this meeting with General Vanuxem. In 1963, when he was foreign minister, Mr. Vu Van Mao had shaved his head in opposition to the Ngo Dinh Diem administration's oppression of the Buddhists. In early 1975, Mr. Mao, then serving as president of the Nquang Buddhists' Movement for Reconciliation and Concord, met in Paris with Pham Van Ba, director of our PRG Information Bureau. At the end of April 1975, Mr. Mao was asked by President Minh to serve as Prime Minister. Mr. Vu Van Mao was amazed to hear General Vanuxem's proposal. General Vanuxem said to President Minh, "The situation is not at all without hope. I have just finished making arrangements in Paris. You should make a call for outside intervention from another country. That country will intervene immediately. I can arrange to be the liaison. I would liaise from here." Duong Van Minh said, "I have no more time. I don't have even a single day." After General Vanuxem left, those who had attended the meeting with Duong Van Minh returned to their seats. Mr. Duong Van Minh said, "We sold our nation to France and then to the United States. Now he wants to help us to sell our country a third time." In addition to selecting Vu Van Mao to serve as Prime Minister, Duong Van Minh made other important appointments. Mr. Nguyen Hu Han, a former ARVN general, had been an efficient corps agent, that is, a spy, for our secret Central-Level Agitation Committee for the South. Mr. Duong Van Minh appointed him Chief of Staff of the ARVN General Headquarters. As our Army's lightning offensive against Saigon began, Mr. Minh appointed lawyer Tru Quoc Man, an underground member of the Communist Party, as the city's police chief with responsibility, among other tasks, to free political prisoners immediately and dismantle the old administration's police forces. Lastly, according to Nguyen Tan Man, former president of the Saigon Students' Association, Mr. Duong Van Minh had housed Man, thereby helping him avoid the secret police. Before that, from 1972, General Duong Van Minh had stood up in support of the youth and student movements opposing the Thu administration. Duong Van Minh referred to himself in an intimate, friendly way as Qua crossover. In his message to the youth, Qua knows the direction you youth are taking. Qua supports you. The truth is that Qua supports establishment of the third force, but Qua wishes to remain on the outside and change the existing administration in order to speak about reconciliation and concord with the National Liberation Front. The actual events in Saigon at the end of April 1975 proved that Mr. Duong Van Minh did indeed stand up, just as he had planned. My colleagues and I, who were active in the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, spent many years concentrating on the issue of national reconciliation and concord. Over time, imperialists and colonialists invading other countries have employed a policy of divide and conquer. The U.S. administrations plotted to divide the land of Eternal Vietnam in order to create the sector of nationalist South Vietnam, in opposition to Communist North Vietnam. Then they could implement their insidious policy of Vietnamizing the war by using Vietnamese to kill Vietnamese. This created division between and hatred among Vietnamese. Our people can never forget this. During the American War, including the period after the Paris Agreements, our party countered the enemy's divide and rule policy by using the opposite strategy. We drew together all our patriotic, progressive forces and individuals regardless of who they were in order to combine their strengths into a national people's front for widespread struggle. Our policy of reconciliation and concord was a large, expansive policy with the spirit of the party's strategy and our people's great unity. This lesson has value today for the struggle of our people as we protect and develop our country. By 1976, the NLF and the organizations associated with the armed struggle in the South had completed their historic responsibilities. The Vietnamese Fatherland Front and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam came into being. A number of NLF staff went to work in state offices. Later, the Ho Chi Minh City Fatherland Front and the Central Level Fatherland Front sought participation by people from the political forces previously active in the South and allied with the Saigon administration. These included Nguyen Van Huyen, who refused because of health reasons, and Nguyen Hu Co, a minister of defense for the former Saigon administration. During recent years, the Vietnamese state has had many guidelines and policies. We need even more supportive guidelines to help us address the many deep wounds in our land and among our people. We must fully implement a policy of reconciliation and concord for our people, not the least because we Vietnamese arise from one source and from one homeland, but also because of an even greater meaning we Vietnamese have one destiny and one future. Every Vietnamese wants to have a Vietnam, which is developed, strong, and equal to any other country, a Vietnam worthy of its awe-inspiring history of several thousand years. To implement such a substantial wish, we must mobilize all Vietnamese everywhere. Musician Trinh Cong Sun wrote a song, A Mother's Legacy, with lines that rend my heart. 1,000 years of Chinese domination. 100 years of Western occupation. 20 years of civil war. Our people have borne so much pain in order to achieve the peace, independence, reunification, and complete territorial integrity that we have today. We will never allow that painful past to reoccur. 11. Entering the field of education. In September 1976, I was elected to the National Assembly and formally asked to serve as Education Minister for the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. One day that autumn, I met for the first time with the deputy ministers and department heads at the ministry. My friends had joked with me. "Sister," they said, "you they landed in an ant's nest." Those deputy ministers are formidable. Perhaps these views added to my own apprehension about this assignment. I approached the ministry as if I were a solitary warrior riding her horse into a strange battlefield. I was determined to do my best and decided that whatever transpired would be fine. Nguyen Van Huyen, a prominent Vietnamese intellectual, had served as minister for many years. He had passed away more than a year before, leaving behind 3 deputy ministers. Voth Nguyen No, Ho Truc, and Nguyen Canton. Comrades No and Truc had been at the ministry for many years, while Comrade Tone had just been promoted. At that time, the Ministry of Education was located at 19 Le Tontong in a large, French-designed building, which had previously been the administration building for the Hanoi Medical and Pharmaceutical University. A year after my arrival, 2 other deputy ministers were appointed. Bui Ton Kiat, a high-level political officer of the People's Liberation Army from the Ho Chi Minh City's military administration, and Comrade Y Ngong Nic Dam, rector of Tay Nguyen University. That day of my first staff meeting, nearly 20 comrades from the senior leadership and various departments greeted me in the ministry's large room on the 2nd floor. My first words came from my heart. I am here on assignment from the party. I can possibly address most matters as well as you comrades. I will try my best to hold your ideas in high esteem. But in the end, I must make decisions and bear the responsibility. I hope you comrades will be supportive. I think this reasonable and modest statement touched their sense of comradeship. Actually, the reality veered away from the jokesters' predictions. My ministry comrades were accustomed to friendly, collegial, professional relationships. In particular, Comrade Ho Truc, party secretary at the ministry for many years, Comrade Le Huyen, head of the organization department, Comrade Nguyen Minh Quang, head of the administration department, and others helped me a great deal during my first days. Each person in the ministry's leadership had his own idiosyncrasies, strengths, and weaknesses, yet everyone worked together as a united group. As a result, even though leading the Ministry of Education was a complex assignment, I could complete my responsibilities because I had these colleagues, assistants. In general, during my time as Minister of Education, I met no resistance or conflict worth noting within the ministry. The difficulty lay in the work's heavy weight and the fact that every aspect of that assignment was entirely new for me. I tried my very best, according to the lesson I been taught during childhood: whenever you accept a task, decide to complete it as best you can. After liberation, like other state branches, the Ministry of Education had to implement its management across the entire country. Education was a huge ministry. The 2 regions had used different educational systems for 20 years. Public education in the former North was 10 years in length, while it was 12 years in the former South. The curriculum and textbooks were different. In particular, the 2 regions had different levels of material covered in each grade. Despite the cruel war, the educational system in the former North had developed markedly. At that time, shortly after the war ended, everyone spoke of the Socialist Garden's 2 most beautiful flowers: education and health. Friends from other countries admired Vietnam's achievements in eradicating illiteracy and developing its educational system for the people's cultural attainment and professional capacity. We called our soldiers educated troops. Since, at that time, youth joining the army had finished 7th grade or above. However, in the former South, schools had been developed only in the cities and in scattered areas along the national highways. The level of illiteracy was very high. Our first responsibility was to unify the ministry's management system quickly, while simultaneously developing education in the southern provinces, particularly in remote areas without schools. We organized a major mobilization to send northern teachers to support the southern provinces. We thought of this move as modeled on the march to the south in previous years. During 1977 and 1978, several thousand teachers from northern provinces answered the ministry's appeal and volunteered to serve in southern provinces. Nay and Ha Tinh provinces sent the largest number of teachers to work in the former South. At the end of July 1977, I went on an inspection tour in the Mekong Delta. I traveled from the middle of Dong Thap Moi province down to Kien Jeong and Ca Mau and saw for myself the presence of many northern teachers. The senior party leaders and local administrators were delighted, but some people also spoke frankly, saying, "These teachers are very dedicated, but some of them speak with Nguyen, Ha Tin, and Quang Bin accents. At first, the children can understand them. I met with the teachers and encouraged them to speak slowly and adjust their accents. Not only teachers but also management staff went south. We were fortunate that many southern students had come to the north for training during the war. They had matured during their years working in northern provinces. They returned to their southern home provinces. With their help, setting up an educational framework in southern provinces was less difficult. After 2 years, we finished establishing the management system across the country. About 5 years later, by 1983, the Ministry of Education had a network of public schools in every southern province, district, and commune. Other major initiatives included eradicating illiteracy among workers and supplementing cultural education for staff and youth. We completed the Light of Culture campaign across the former South on February 28, 1978, with illiteracy eradicated among 94% of people in the program. This success followed the high-level party leaders' directives, but it also stemmed from the participation of the entire ministry, the educational administration, and the people. The complementary work supplementing cultural education for staff was completed at the same time. We worked with great effort to improve the quality of preschools for children entering the public schools. We built schools in remote and mountainous areas, improved the curriculum and pedagogy for teaching the youngest of our children, and established much-needed policies for teachers and management staff. After I joined the Ministry of Education, I saw early on that I must concentrate on teacher training, for this was the engine of education and the source of an educational system's strength and quality. In 1946, Uncle Ho had established a system for teacher education when our country still faced extreme difficulties. Even during the resistance war against French colonialism and then during the resistance war against American imperialism, the North organized pedagogical schools from the central level to the regions and provinces and then continued widening that system. On the central level, we had the Hanoi Pedagogical University, the first university built during that period. It trained teachers up to standard and graduated many scientists, who served in research institutes as well as in party and state offices. At that time, the state budget was severely limited, yet demands were huge. The Hanoi Pedagogical University and the pedagogical universities in Ven, Thai Nguyen, and other sites were hard-pressed for financial resources to support students, learning and living. We had an expression, eat like begging monks, live like prisoners. In particular, we concentrated on establishing pedagogical schools to train teachers on site. For this task, we once again assigned staff and teachers from our northern normal schools. We began by building normal schools for elementary school teachers. After a time, we built colleges for secondary school teachers. Finding staff and teachers for normal schools was difficult, as was the task of finding students to become teachers. The need to develop teachers for elementary and secondary schools was pressing. In many localities, we trained people for just 1 or 2 years, to a 7th grade level but sometimes only to a 5th grade level. Those teachers then taught up to their same levels. We called this, rice dipped in rice. Later, teachers who had been trained in this abbreviated way received additional education to bring them up to appropriately higher levels. Unfortunately, some teachers could not manage the additional study required, thus affecting the quality of public school teaching in many localities during subsequent years. Sao Lan, Dong Thap Province had the first higher-level normal school in the Mekong Delta. This model school graduated many classes of secondary school teachers, who served Dom Thap and other neighboring provinces. In general, students didn't want to attend pedagogical school. They had a saying, only a rat at the end of its tether enters pedagogical school. I visited the Hanoi Pedagogical University's dining hall and immediately felt uneasy. The students' situation was impossible. They had to eat standing up, for there were no chairs. Each table had a pot of rice, a dish of salted vegetables, and a bowl of pilotless soup. Each student had a bowl and spoon. That's how they ate. Our country faced a period of serious socio-economic crisis between liberation of the South in April 1975 and renovation in late 1986. The government worried constantly about providing our people with food. Then, in the midst of our economic difficulties came the genocidal Pol Pot regime's attacks from Cambodia into the southwest of Vietnam. The Cambodian Liberation Front appealed to us for help. Vietnamese soldiers once again volunteered. And then, in February 1979, China attacked our northern border, to teach Vietnam a lesson. But what mistake had we made? I visited a number of northern provinces, Quang Ninh, Hoang Linh Son, and so on. I saw our ravaged cities and our people suffering. The invading Chinese had destroyed Lang Son Province's tertiary school. I was so moved to see our youth zealously setting off to defend our homeland's border. These youth fought bravely, just as their fathers and older brothers had before them. We and perhaps the entire world were stunned, asking, why would one socialist country invade another socialist country? Indeed, here was true sorrow. Nevertheless, I understood that each nation, even among socialist nations, held its own interests paramount. I remembered an anecdote from 8 years before, around 1971, during a meeting in Kiruna, northern Sweden. It was near midnight, and snow was falling heavily. Even though the area was thinly populated, people arrived in large numbers, including the elderly. After I described the situation in Vietnam, an elderly woman stood up and asked, "Have you Vietnamese friends thought about what you will do after you chased out the Americans and then the Chinese arrive?" We in our delegation looked at each other. How could she ask such a question? I explained that no such incident could transpire between socialist countries, for we socialists shared the comradely feeling of brothers and sisters. Yet now, in 1979, hearing that China had invaded Vietnam, I wondered, what would that elderly woman think? She had been truly profound, with an experienced person's range of sight. As for us, we had been so naive. The border war with China was incredibly cruel, with more than 120,000 Chinese troops assaulting the 6 northern provinces of Vietnam, bringing so many casualties and so much material loss. Several tens of thousands of our children and younger siblings once again poured out their blood to protect our country. For so many years, we have not wanted to tell the stories of that pain in the relationship between Vietnam and China. But it is disturbing that even today in Chinese public discussion there are cruel distortions, where our interlocutors say that the events of February 17, 1979 occurred because Vietnam provoked China, that Vietnam was ungrateful and had no sense of gratitude. How could Vietnam, having just passed through 30 years of cruel war and still having to address so many unbound war wounds, attack another country? Why would Vietnam provoke China, a huge, socialist country, which had helped us liberate and reunite our nation? How could protecting our own people from Khmer Rouge genocide and saving the Cambodian people from genocide be considered a crime? A subsequent situation helps us see the truth. On March 14, 1988, China sent its naval forces to occupy Gac Ma, Johnson South Reef, which belongs to Vietnam's Trong Sa archipelago, the Spratlys. 64 Vietnamese troops died in combat. Then, in 2009, China announced its cow's tongue, with 9 points in an assault aimed at occupying all the East Sea, regardless of international law. Using that absurd premise, China has been constantly engaged in actions invading the territory of other nations, in particular territory belonging to Vietnam. This threatens the region's peace and security. Indeed, China has exposed its expansionist intentions recently, as it did in 1979. Life during 1979 and early 1980 was especially hard. In general, party and state officials had to do additional work, such as making handicrafts and tending chickens or pigs to supplement their meager wages. People would say, teaching is the additional work of teachers. Tens of thousands of teachers asked to quit. The state had to lay off some of its staff. The Ministry of Education lost many of its best teachers. In April 1980, I discussed with comrades from the Vietnam Educators Union the idea for a national congress inIen Dung District, Ha Bac Province, to discuss ways to improve teachers' lives. Yen Dung had developed some good models. We wanted to mobilize a movement, study and practice like Yen Dung. Educational leaders in Yen Dung had asked the local authorities for land to plant Hai Duong lychees.